and thanks to everybody, thanks to the organizer. So today I want to share some experience and some perspective in what I learned about digital volume correlation analysis for metamaterials in large deformations. And okay, this is the plan of the talk. How did we start? We started investigating possible exotic behavior for pantographic blocks, and we'll see that we have different possible deformation shapes. We wanted to move toward the validation of a 3D continuum model to model pantographic block even in large deformation strain. And what happened is that we naturally moved to digital image correlation and digital volume correlation for the experimental measurements, and some issues arose. So we had to deal with some issues. So first thing, let's be on the same page. So what I'm talking about in this talk, I'm considering pantographic block. So basically a metamaterial made of a finite number of parallel pantographic sheets that are interconnected by these pivots that may be deformable, so elastic pivots, or perfect hinges. And we have an architecture that is organized along three principal directions. So two of them are those of the direction of the beams that are defining the pantographic plane, and the third one, orthogonal to the pantographic plane, is the one parallel to the axis of the hinges. And we will consider two cases. One is in the picture on the left. We have elastic deformable cylinders acting as pivots, and on the right we have perfect hinges that allows the change of angle between beams with, in principle, no deformation energy, no cost in deformation energy. And we can see that basically we built this elementary rhombus, this elementary cell in both cases, and we built the geometry starting from this elementary cell. So we have essentially a periodic structure. And when I say pantographic block, I'm just thinking to a multi-layer pantographic sheet. Okay, so some experience we had with the first test is that the behavior may be a little bit different case by case. So for instance, in this case we have three three-point bending tests. The first case, we have essentially a vertical section that is translating rigidly, almost rigidly, and the specimen is deforming in this kind of U shape. In this case, instead, we have a more flat bottom surface of the specimen, and an S-shape bending of the beams is activated. In this third case, that is the one that was talking about also Professor Dell'Aquila in the previous presentation, we have essentially a flat bottom. So we were curious about possible deformation shapes and what are the features that triggers different behaviors. We started studying this kind of tests, and what I'll talk about is essentially about two tests. So the first one is on this kind of specimen. So this is the nominal geometry we use to 3D print the sample. The specimen was printed via SLS technique at Warsaw University of Technology, and we have here you can see 11 layers of beams, and the connection is with deformable elastic cylinders. And we will consider a 3-point bending test where the displacement is imposed parallel to the short side of the pantographic plane. So it's clear from these sections. And just one thing, the dimension of the sample are written here. The side, the short side of the pantographic plane is less than 6 centimeters. This is interesting because we are talking about imposed displacement of from 24 until 39 millimeters for a sample that has a height of 56. So very large relative displacement. And how we study the test, we had microcomputed X-ray tomography to acquire 3-dimensional scans of both the reference and the deformed configuration of the sample during the test. And this was done in École Normale Paris-Saclay in Paris. And okay, here you can see the section of the sample in the reference scan and in 2 successive loaded configurations. You can see that the deformation is so the imposed displacement is very high compared to the height of the sample, and the labels are expressed in voxels that are 3-dimensional pixels, whose size for this experiment is of 83 micron. And how to then complete the measurements? We made use of finite element based digital volume correlation. So the 3-dimensional, let's say the 3-dimensional version of digital image correlation. And so basically what we were looking for is the displacement U, and we looked for the displacement as the one that minimizes the gray level residual, so the difference in gray level between the reference scan and the current scan. And this minimization is done in a setup of nonlinear least square minimization. Actually, this is not all, because for these cases we needed to add a penalty term to consider to perform the so-called anti-elasticity regularization. So we had to penalize the placements that require a too high concentration of elastic energy. So this is actually what we did, the true minimization. So there is a weight that has to be a posteriori chosen. And the kernels for the DVC analysis are the Corelli 3.0 that were provided by the Laboratoire de Mécanique de Paris-Saclay. And so how we proceed? So the first step is always the backtracking procedure. So basically we have a nominal geometry and we prepare a mesh based on the nominal geometry. We have a reference scan. We have to compare the two to see possible printing defects, and to fit the mesh on the current reference scan. So how this is done, this is quite standard, because for this case we are able to use a coarse auxiliary mesh that is encompassing the whole volume of the reference scan, so that we may, for instance, here notice these are the displacement fields, longitudinal, transverse and vertical. So we may see here that the labels are expressed still in voxel, that the specimen was a little bit shortened in the longitudinal side and a little bit higher in the vertical direction, probably due to the transport, some small load during the transport. And so we had no particular issues with the backtracking. We may use the macro mesh to deal with, but then we have to move to the measurement of the displacements between nodes of the mesh, between the reference and the first scan. Okay, now we are considering a extremely high displacement for what is standard digital volume correlation, and these, together with the fact that the microstructure is essentially periodic, make a lot easier to get stuck in local minima, and so that the minimization procedure risk not to converge to the absolute minimum. And the use of coarse auxiliary mesh in this case was not helpful. So we had to discuss how to deal with this issue, and what was done here was to go back on the theory, and basically we considered the continuum model proposed by Stiels and other recently, to prepare some numerical simulations that we could use to predict the position of the pivots, and then using static condensation prepare a first guess for the displacement of each node of the mesh. So what is done here, we see with the red crosses the numerical simulation, the prediction made using numerical simulations, and we can compare with the white dots that are the current position of the actual position of the pivots. Here, clearly we needed an heuristic calibration step for finding this good result, and clearly make aware that we just need a result sufficiently close to have a good initial guess, and then the minimization procedure will do the work. So we had a great success in this case using the theoretical model. Without using the theoretical model, we were able to solve this case by clicking and looking for the position of each pivot one by one by hand. That clearly is a procedure that is not robust. You can use it here because you can assume essentially uniformity in the transverse direction, but it's not general, and it's a lot of time consuming. So this is what we did in the end. Model-driven initialization, we had great success, and these are the displacement fields we measured in the end. So we can see, okay, these are the vertical displacement, longitudinal displacement, so the pantographic block elongates a lot while loaded in the vertical direction. And what you see here is also a buckling in the transverse direction. So we have basically the specimen slipped on one of the supports. So this is something we could not, we could not predict numerically because we did not trigger any perturbation in the transverse direction. But we can see that these are the numerical results. The qualitative agreement is very good, and I would say also the quantitative, even if we did not rigorously calibrated the model. And just for sake of clarity, the material lines that are designed, that are drawn on the samples are just for purpose of readability. The model used is continuous. Okay, just to comment. Once we had success in this measurement, we can really go deep into the specimen, and element per element we can study how is displaced and deformed. For instance, here I have selected just the hinges, 2 sections of hinges in the reference and in the loaded configuration to show some of the features. For instance, we can see the shear of the pivots, we can see the buckling in the transverse direction, we can see that essentially in the transverse direction the length of the specimen remains the same. We can see that the bottom of the specimen in the longitudinal direction remains essentially flat, while the top has a small curvature. And we can analyze the deformation mode of this top surface. For instance, in this case, this is the experimental and these are the numerical results. We did interpolate the top rows of pivots to see how is the paraboloid interpolating this pivot, and what we found is essentially a monoclastic deformation. That means that the 2 principal curvatures of this surface are, one of them is non-zero, even if it's small. The other one is essentially negligible. And this is not standard for every material. For instance, even for the same material, if we load in the, let's say, orthogonal to the pantographic plane, what we found is the anticlastic deformation mode that was talking about Professor De Litola this morning. And okay, so the second case I want to quickly discuss is the experiment that we were showing in the beginning of the presentation. So here we have again a pantographic structure, but in this case it's a more sparse, it's less dense, and the pivots are perfect pivots and are built by, let's say, leaving a gap between the shaft acting as a pin of the pivot and the beams. And so in this case we have 0 energy floppy modes because we have really perfect pivots. So to allow the specimen to be tested in 3-point bending, we made use of these constraints that are 4 elastic bars that are locking the beam ends in the 2 ends of the specimen. Again, we did the experiment in the tomographic chamber, so we could acquire 3D scans, and we had to proceed as we did before. Again, first step is backtracking. We can make use of macro auxiliary mesh, and everything is quite standard right now. So here we can see that there is displacement, so the the specimen, the reference scan with respect to the nominal geometry is longer, is elongated in the longitudinal direction, and is a little bit U-shaped in the vertical direction due to the presence of gaps into the pivots and the load of the gravity load. And okay, this was done. And then we had again the issue of how to deal with the initialization of the first step of digital volume correlation. So in this case, what we did was, again, we cannot use the macro mesh because we have a mechanism we can have in the same element part of the body that act essentially independently, so this was not working. So we worked on the micro mesh fitted on the specimen, and what we did as the first was just to provide a manual initialization. So what I did was essentially to look manually to these key blue points and interpolate everything linearly. So this is done for the middle section of the specimen, and actually it worked. But it was a nightmare. I mean, we needed a lot of iterations for converging. We had to assume uniformity in the transverse direction that is not true in this case. So we were able to find the good results in the end, but this was not the best way to proceed. But why we didn't proceeded with the model-driven initialization? Because we didn't trust our model. So we did the measurements, we have the experimental results measured via digital volume correlation, and then we said, okay, let's try to compare to what we can do with the continuous model. And a posteriori, I would say the agreement is very nice. We can see here that in this case we have a kind of synclastic, so egg-shaped top surface deformation. So we are in a different situation with the two cases presented before. Again, these material lines are just for readability purpose, and the qualitative agreement was very good. So we tried to make a comparison quantitative. So in this case we are showing the measured placement of the specimen, and the circles are the position, the placement of the center of the pivots predicted by the continuous model. Now, the agreement is not perfect, and we have several reasons for this, because we have a very not dense specimen. The specimen is full of gaps that clearly introduce errors compared to the numerical simulations, but a posteriori I would say this is a good first guess for the DVC. It is sufficient for avoiding the nightmare we had doing everything manually. So to conclude, what we found was that a theory-driven analysis turns out to be very powerful as an instrument for proceed with digital volume correlation analysis, especially in this large displacement regime and in these cases of periodic microstructures that otherwise are giving us additional issues. and we found some initial positive results in the direction of validating the proposed continuous model for pantographic block, and we are exploring a quite wide range of deformation modes of these kind of specimens. And what we are working on right now is clearly a rigorous calibration and sensitivity analysis for the continuous model, and the implementation of a dynamic correction of the regularization for taking into account damage like rupture of beams or elements. And this is the work where is introduced the continuous model we made use for the simulation, and these others are the papers in which is written what I have talked about today. I have to thank the Coste Vita that, and the University of L'Aquila that partially funded this research and allowed me to go to Paris for this experiment. And I have to thank Dr. Rafał Drobniczki that kindly provided us the first sample I have talked about. That's all. Thanks.